you. I have one last presentation that's a little longer than the first two. And it's that time of year when we propose the changes that we would recommend to the Commission for sport fishing and our live bait proclamations. So where we're at in this cycle is that in April, we asked for public comment on sport fishing, and we got several comments this year. Most of them were in regard to crappie fishing on Kentucky Lake. And now we're at a point in September where we've gone through all our internal discussions about the public comments and our own thoughts on managing these fisheries. And I'm here today to give you the Commission preview. Following this, there'll be at least 4 weeks between now and the next Commission meeting, so we'll have an opportunity to get public comment on what we hear today, and we'll have that information for you at the next Commission meeting, so you can have that information as well. The first proposal is on Douglas Reservoir. The current regulation on hybrid striped bass and striped bass on Douglas Reservoir is the statewide regulation. Fish have to be 15 inches and you're allowed 2 fish. Well, we're not managing Douglas Reservoir for striped bass or hybrid striped bass. They apparently are starting to become more common. We're not exactly sure of the mechanism, but we would like to have them removed. We have no reason to protect them with this statewide regulation. So our proposal is that we include hybrid striped bass and striped bass in the white bass regulation. So you could have all 3 varieties in one bag limit of 15 fish a day with no size limit. This will encourage the removal of these fish, and it will also limit or eliminate some of the anxiety some anglers might have about wondering if they have a hybrid or a white bass. So you can see those 2 fish there. The one on top is the white bass, the other is a hybrid out of Priest Lake. But you know, a lot of anglers have trouble discerning those two varieties, and when we're managing for hybrid striped bass or striped bass, we want anglers to do that. But if we're not, there's no reason to put that burden on them. So we're letting them have them all combined on this lake. That would be our recommendation. On Laurel Fork in Carter County, this is a wild trout stream. And we have a boundary defined that needs to be adjusted. It should read the cable crossing at U.S. Forest Service at Dennis Cove Recreation Area upstream to the Forest Service boundary. The way it currently reads, it's a bit ambiguous and probably goes on to some private land that we don't want to be doing. So that this will keep it contained in the Forest Service property. Another change to the proclamation we'd recommend is deleting cast netting, dipping, and shad trawling. And the reason we say that is it's already in our bait proclamation, and we don't want to have it in both places. It's just a housekeeping issue, and there's also some regulations associated with this harvest that should be addressed in the bait proclamation, and you'll see that towards the end of this presentation.
We're not doing away with it.
No, we're not doing away with it. No. We're not. We're removing it from one proclamation and leaving it in the other. Okay, on Dale Hollow Reservoir, we currently have rod limits in place. You're allowed 3 rods in use per person, per boat, or 6 rods in use for a bank angler. We get calls on this. People are confused why they're different. We would propose we just do 4 rods for all angler types on the lake, period. On Calderwood Reservoir, we have a reciprocal agreement with the state of North Carolina. It's been in place since 1994. And Calderwood's about a 500 and some acre reservoir. It's got really steep sides, really not a lot of bank fishing there. And the reciprocal agreement applies only to boat anglers. So if you're a Tennessean and you want to enjoy the trout that Tennessee stocks in that lake, you have to drive to North Carolina, and you better have a boat to be on their side of the lake with that while you're fishing. And the only really reasonable bank access is on the North Carolina side. So we would like Tennessee anglers to be able to use the North Carolina side of this lake, since we're stocking really over half of the fish that are going into this trout fishery. And incidentally, this trout fishery is reimbursed through mitigation dollars from, Rocky Mountain, Smoky Mountain Hydro. So, but we are providing fish, and so is North Carolina. It's only fair that our anglers get a chance to fish from the bank if they want to. Now, so our proposal would be to strike the language that says for boat anglers only, and we're negotiating, so to speak, with North Carolina. By that, I mean we've just asked them if they would do the same. The biologists that are over there work with us on a lot of other projects in the mountains. They understand our concern, and they're willing to bring it forward to their commission. So it's on a similar track in North Carolina. It's not like we can know that one state is going to get to the finish line first. It's just a matter of faith. The good news on our end is that even if we say we're allowing all anglers, there's really nowhere for people to come to Tennessee and fish from the bank because it is steep. So we got nothing to lose here, and I think we'll gain a little bit of real estate for Tennessee fishermen out of this. As I mentioned, one of the areas of concern in our public comments period this year was for crappie on Kentucky Lake. Kentucky Lake is traditionally a really good crappie fishery. In the last few years, we've seen poor spawning success or recruitment of fish in that system, and anglers are telling us that fishing's getting worse. We agree, it's not as good as it can be. It's having some down years. So we had a public meeting to explain what we are seeing on this lake in June in Paris, and Tim Broadbent gave a pretty detailed description of what is happening on the lake and what we can and can't do about it. And I just wanted to summarize some of the points that he made so the commission was aware of it. I'll start with some crappie facts. Crappie populations are notoriously boom or bust. We always get some variability in fish populations, but the order of magnitude of that variability is much higher in crappie populations in Tennessee, in Alabama, everywhere. The current 10-inch length limit is adequate to protect spawning fish. I mentioned that we were having poor spawning success. It's not due to a lack of fish that are old enough to spawn or big enough to spawn. The problem lies in environmental variables. Crappie like really wet years to spawn in. If something's not right, we can have really poor success. And that drives the system. During that public meeting, we had a lot of people say, oh, we got to save spawners. It really doesn't need to be a 10-inch size limit or anything bigger than a 10-inch size limit to save spawners. There's plenty of them. And crappie have really high natural mortality rates, and because of that, our use of length and creel limits are much less effective than they are for other species. We don't have the opportunity to stockpile crappie by putting a high size limit on it and assuming they're going to be there next month even. They die pretty quickly. And we really can't correct this boom or bust population cycle with regulation, with creel and length limits anyway, or really anything at our disposal on the angling side. Well, let me discuss one of the proposals we heard was to have higher length limits. Let's see what that would do to the population. Again, we have a 10-inch size limit now. That's the same size limit that the state of Kentucky uses on Kentucky Lake. Based on the work that Tim Broadbent's crew does to measure the growth and mortality rates of fish in the lake, we can look at what a 10-inch size limit does and what an 11-inch size limit does in terms of the number of fish we would expect to see harvested, taken home in a given year. If we move from a 10-inch size limit to an 11-inch size limit, the number of fish going home decreases 25%. And you might say, well, that's not so bad if the fish are bigger. They're 11-inch fish now. But in fact, because their fish are dying while they're waiting to get 11 inches, the overall yield in that population actually declines by 7 to 10%, depending on how much fishing pressure goes on, and that's over a wide range of fishing pressure. So length limits are they're a bad idea for this lake any higher than 10 inches. because we'd be over-regulating and losing yield. Now, when we do interviews with our anglers, we also measure the fish that they have in their creel for a subsample of them. And when we've done that, we're able to look at what they've caught traditionally over time and said, let's take all the 10 to 11-inch fish out and pretend it had been an 11-inch creel limits. So how many fish would that angler have had to turn back? And on average, over time, about 39% of the fish would be released under an 11-inch size limit. If you go up to a 12-inch size limit, it's much higher. And remember, these fish that are released are not necessarily going to be there next year. You can't stockpile them. They're dying over time. It takes about 7 months for a fish to get from 10 inches to 11 inches, and a lot can happen in 7 months if you're a fish. The next suggestion that we had was to lower creel limits, and this is a pretty nice limit of crappie there. That's 31 fish, actually. So maybe there were 2 people. They needed the wheelbarrow, though. That's a good day. But the creel limit is 30, and that's generous. It certainly would should motivate people to go and have high expectations for the day anyway. In fact, though, only about 6% of the people ever catch 30 crappie on average over time. If a 20-fish creel limit has been suggested by the public. It is also the same creel limit that the state of Kentucky uses. And if, based on the interviews or the actual fish on hand during creel interviews, on the north side of the lake, a 20-fish creel limit would have spared 9% of the fish harvested in a typical year and has very little effect on the south side of the lake. And that 20-fish creel limit would affect about 17% of the angler trips. And again, little effect on the south side. And then north-south is based on New Johnsonville Bridge. Others propose a 15-inch creel limit, which might be relevant because we have other lakes that are 15 in Tennessee that are much less productive than Kentucky Lake. The percent of fish that would be released with a 15-inch or 15-fish creel limit is about 19%. And that would affect about 29% of angler trips on the north side of the lake. Another suggestion that we had was to limit the number of poles. And as you probably know, spider rig fishing, as this is called, is getting more popular. It's just another way people are traditionally, some people probably consider it tradition by this point to be fishing this way. We have a lot of adaptations in fisheries where people have better and better techniques like side scan sonar and all the best gadgets. You know, we always figure, at least our philosophy when we've talked about it has been that they have the same creel limit and size limits as everyone else. If their day ends earlier, you know, that's their option. So we just limits apply to everyone. We're not recommending any change to the poles. And we have in the literature, there's very little sense that the catch and release of crappie with a lot of poles out is a problem. Those fish get back in the water quickly if they're undersized. So in summary, we're not recommending any changes to Kentucky Lake. This issue we're observing with poor recruitment does not mean we have overfishing. They're different things. We don't think we would be very successful in turning this around with a length limit. The creel limit could alleviate some anglers' concerns about, you know, is somebody catching more fish than I am, and maybe share the wealth a little bit. But there could be years when there's a lot of fish out there. If we're in one of them boom years, that opportunity is not there. Those fish could be harvested and they won't be. So that's something to consider. And there's some good news in this too, that the year classes from 2014 and 2015 were very good. So we're expecting, Tim promised me good fishing next year. Right, Tim? Yeah, well, the numbers are there, the fish are there. You know, we can only, this kind of up and down cycle, I said, is common, and it's not the first time we've experienced it on Kentucky Lake either. And with that,
You want to
I might
stop?
pause for a question or two.
I started to say, let's stop it on the sport fish before we get into the
Yeah,
break.
yeah.
Is there any questions or comments from the Fisheries Committee on the sport fish preview? Miss Connie, go ahead.
Because I have to compete next door. Usually I'm shushed, but I don't have much trouble people hearing me. But I would like to see the 20 fish creel limit, mainly because, I mean, I'm a fisherman there. Our roots go really deep there from way back. We have property there. We fish there. So I'm not just fishing, but I'm talking to a lot of people, a lot of fishermen, the guides, the buddies, the people that call me and text me and email me, and just that is what I hear they really think would be at least a good feel good, if nothing else, a feel good thing that we are concerned, want to help the resource, and maybe that's just would be a good acceptable thing for us. So I'd like you to really think about that too. I mean, I know you have thought about it. Obviously, I love all of this, and I hope you're right. I hope we don't have to worry about it. So I just wanted to make that statement. I would love to see, not love to, but I think that would be a good thing, is to bring it down to 20 would be a good compromise for us. But can I add also that my friend Kim Wilson and I won the fishing tournament today. I should have made this announcement before when we were making it.
Today is Connie's birthday.
Stop it.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Hey, in all fairness, they had a ringer of a guide this morning, though. I knew that when we was talking to them on the pier. So.
Well, and I want to say Kim's really my guide on Kentucky Lake. She and I fish together a lot, and so she has a lot of good input too. She might not get up and say it, but I think she would agree with me that a 20 fish would be an okay thing that we would accept and make the fishermen and those that are real concerned, because there's, like you say, there's some very concerned fishermen down that way. So just getting that on the out there.
Thank you,
I
Commissioner.
think she's making that as a recommendation since we're just previewing right now. So.
Thank you.
That's right. We'll be sure to capture that in the press release so that people could comment on that as well.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the sport fish preview? Comments? Any from the audience? Hear none, let's move on to bait fish.
All right, that's how I do it. No, so we've got several proposed changes to our live bait proclamation, and if you ever saw me cast netting, you would wonder why we need to conserve anything. I'm catching 5 fish at a time. What could I hurt? But there's a lot of the reasons why we even have a bait proclamation is we want to limit the movement of certain species of fish, especially invasive species, around the country and around the state. And even our native fish that get moved around within the state can get moved to places they don't belong and have unwanted consequences. So that's what really got us thinking more about a bait proclamation several years ago when we did it. The next steps, though, I mean, there's a lot of agencies thinking about what to do with their bait proclamation. Everyone is so concerned about fish moving around the country. A lot of authorities have gone to no live bait, period. And we have a more staggered approach. As you'll see, we have kind of a safer list and other lists of things you can do with certain species, but not others. But our goal is to provide something for anglers to use that's reasonable and still protect the resource. So that's what I'll be talking about today. That we're going to have to go through 4 classes, class A through D, in detail, really to show where the changes are, just so it makes sense. That's the only way I could do it. The bait proclamation that we're proposing is called the bait proclamation, not the live bait proclamation. We want it to apply to both live and dead fish for a variety of reasons. But that's the first major change to the whole proclamation. And the Class A list is a safer list of species, fish that we move around all the time and have been forever, so we probably can't do any more damage than we already have. I'll give you a list of them in a minute. These fish can be harvested by bait dealers. A bait dealer is someone with a fish dealer license that uses it to deal, buy, or sell bait. And anglers can also harvest these fish. The bait dealer can sell these fish as live or dead fish. And these fish can be moved within the state, and we don't have any problem with them coming into the state either, in and out. As you'll see there, and there's no limits for most of these species on this list, as you'll see. Here's the list. The skipjack herring is one of them. One of the changes that we made, we'd like to recommend this year, is that we add a possession limit to skipjack herring, because all of our limits in our proclamation have both a creel limit and possession limit, and we were requested by law enforcement to clean this up and add a possession limit of twice the daily creel limit, which is what everything else is. For the other species, there is no actual possession or creel limit. And these are your shad, goldfish. Goldfish is not a native fish, but we've had them so long, and they're probably a safe alternative to some other things that people might buy for bait, so we have them on our list and have had them on for some time. The fathead minnows, or the toughies that you buy, the little minnows at most of your bait shops. Golden shiner you'll see for sale pretty commonly. And then sunfish, a bait dealer can sell them if they're less than 4 inches and they're from private waters. And rainbow trout can be sold if they're harvested from a hatchery or something, but they cannot be harvested for sale by bait dealers. That gets into Class B fish that we're more restrictive of. So only anglers can move these fish. These fish can be moved alive or dead, and they have a creel limit of 100 fish a day per species and a 200 possession limit. So typically you think of stone rollers as very common bait fish that's moved about the state by anglers. We don't want these for sale, though. That would create more demand on this than we really would want to see. In some places you can catch blunt nose, bullhead minnows fairly abundantly. And game fish fall in the Class B in that they can be moved about the state live or dead by sport anglers. If you catch on a hook and line, a 6-inch bluegill, you can use it for bait in another place in the state if you want. We get into Class C bait fish, we're a little more restrictive. This is again for anglers only. The anglers can't sell them, bait dealers can't harvest them or sell them. These are bait fish that may be harvested and used alive within the water body. But these fish may not be taken away dead. So this is a little bit, just an example of this would be I'm rolling up on a creek, I throw my cast net, I catch a bunch of different things. And that variety of fish we can't have moving around the state alive. But it's okay if you use them there because that's where they're from. So there's a pretty long list. In a typical stream that you might be stream fishing, there could be easily 40 to 60 species of fish in that creek. And some of them would be on that Class A or B list, but some of them would fall into this C list. And those fish, you could have 50 of them in combination. That's certainly enough to use for your day of fishing, especially if it's supplemented by the Class A and B fish. So our goal is to conserve these fish. These are fish that might even be listed on our species of greatest conservation need, or the ones that the swap plans are written for. So we really want to have some kind of limit on the potential take of these things. Some examples of them, it would be sculpins, shiners of all kinds, and darters, maybe little red horses and things. Your odds of catching lots of these in a day is pretty low, but there's some places where if someone really was getting on, focusing on an area, they could deplete these fish. And the last section is a new section. The old live bait proclamation only went through Class C. This is Class D, conveniently for dead fish, and it applies to bait dealers only. It allows them to harvest and sell dead silversides. It's the only species that's specified by name. These are fish that are commonly caught and sold. We wouldn't want these moved alive because they're not from all parts of the state, and they are listed as an invasive species on many watch lists. So, but if there are people, I'm told, that are doing this and they're selling them dead, so we want to keep allowing them to do that. And lastly, this section, or Class D of the new bait proclamation, would allow bait dealers to import and sell preserved specimens of fish that are not found in Tennessee. So when you go in the Bass Pro or something and you see those packets of salted minnows, they could be like Pacific menhaden or something. We don't care about that, and it's okay. They're all preserved. They're not going to swim out into Tennessee waters and affect our resources. So we wanted to leave that, not really a loophole, but that allowance for people to stock their shelves with the fish they've been having all along. So with that, I'll show that we can use bait effectively, and I'll ask for any questions about our proposal for the bait proclamation.
All right, is there any questions from the Fisheries Committee on the bait proposals? Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, who's rainbow trout?
Yes.
I'm a catch and release bass fisherman, and we've got a ton of people in Upper East Tennessee that buy the trout minnows, go to South Holston, Watauga, Cherokee, sit out on a point, throw a rainbow trout out there. They hook one down past their gauntlet, and they kill that fish a lot more times than another type of angler. Is that something that's up for discussion at all?
I guess gut hooking, or I see what you're saying, like loose line fishing with bait. Would it be something that, I guess, would it be just rainbow trout that would be the concern? That's because I guess you're saying that's what most people are doing. I guess there's a lot of discussion about rainbow trout. It's probably one of the common questions we get in the office. Can you use rainbow trout? A lot of people like to use them for striped bass too. So you've got people buying them, and that's a very safe way to move them around alive. But as far as whether or not there's too many fish being gut hooked or not, I guess it's hard to find that smoking gun. If we see higher mortality rates in a reservoir, it's hard to know just how much influence that had. We were supposed to have an online survey this year a UT survey this year of anglers, and that was one of the questions we were asking them. How prevalent, how many people really are using live bait, and what kind of species are they using? But
I saw several pictures of huge catches of smallmouth that were, all dead, that were caught on rainbow trout that just make me cringe. Yeah. I'm sure that Mr. Bledsoe could add to that.
I just wonder if you cut the line off and left the fish in there, if they'd absorb it, or
I'm sure they would, but I don't think most of those guys are looking to release it to begin with.
Cooking, ain't they?
We've in the past we've come up with these issues with muskie and bass before, and we've tried to encourage. We even had educational things in the guide one year, when we had a little more room, to say encourage people using, shallower shank hooks or circle hooks when they're doing that. That's like the picture I had at the end there, that we're using short shank hooks and actively fishing. You're not going to gut hook a fish doing that, but I know if somebody's got a few rods out and they're not tending them, that can happen. So we'll. Is that?
Yeah,
I don't know how to resolve that just right now. Let's think on that.
Any other discussion from the Fisheries Committee? Any discussion from the audience on bait fish? Frank, thank you.
Thank
You've
you.
done a great job.
Thank you.